Okay, I'll show you about wiring for the Hovercraft project. The wiring has a number of components. There is this battery clip, there are two motors, and then there's a switch. And the way in which you get it all wired up has to be correct. So from the battery clip itself, there are two wires. There's a red wire and a black wire. The red wire from the battery clip must go onto this side of the motor. So it's critical that if you look at the motor from this end, which is like from the back end of the motor where the plastic is, the red wire must go on this side. If you hook this up backward by putting the red wire from the battery clip over here instead, then the motor will run backward. And instead of blowing the air in that direction, the air will blow in this direction. So the first part is the red wire from the battery clip goes onto this side of the motor. And then you need to cut another piece of wire that's going to run from this side of the motor onto the motor that's down below that blows the air straight down. So if you have a piece of a wire and you want to cut it, you can just use a pair of scissors. It'll cut right through the wire and cut through the insulation. And it's very important to make sure that you expose the wire itself. So there's a copper wire that's inside, and then there's red insulation around it. So what you need to do with a pair of scissors is cut through the insulation, the rubber insulation, without cutting through the wire. So if you're very careful about it, you can cut through the rubber insulation and not cut through the wire. So you kind of have to sort of nibble at it just a little bit, maybe twist the wire, and then you can give it a pull. Whenever you pull on it, the rubber insulation will come off the outside and leave the wire inside exposed. So now I've got this wire, so the wire itself in the center is sticking out. So there's the rubber insulation and then the wire. Now the wire is going to be individual little strands. So what you can do is just twist those strands of wire around, and then it makes the little strands kind of tight. That wire can then be pushed through the holes in the motor. The places where you make the connections have little holes in them. Get a little bit more of this insulation off here. So like for instance on the round motor, let's see where I put it. On the round motor here, there are individual holes that are in the connector, and you can push the wire through and then bend it. Whenever you bend the wire upward, the wire will make contact. Now, in the classroom, we can use a soldering iron to be able to solder the connection, but as long as you wrap it around real tight and give it a little squeeze, and maybe you have a pair of pliers you can also squeeze it with, that'll help make the connection. So now the wire is connected to the motor, and it's very important that the metal in the inside of the wire be in contact with the metal connector on the edge of the motor itself. So again, from this diagram, or from this model, the red wire is connected to this side of the motor that's smaller, that has the squarish side. And then the other piece of red wire I just cut, and both ends need to have the insulation stripped off, but you run a short wire from this side of the motor down to the big round motor. Now, that motor, the big round motor, has two different sides. There's this wire I connected onto a side of the motor that doesn't have a vent. If you flip the motor over, you'll see that the other connector is connected to a side that does have a vent. So what's really important is that the wire that runs from the second side of the squarish motor that sits on top down to the motor that's in the bottom be connected to the side of the motor that does not have a vent. Then from the other side of the motor, where the vent is, this can have a wire that runs up to the switch. So let me show you how that goes. If I strip the insulation off some more wire, there's a little bit on this end and some more on this end. I've exposed wire again, and the wire can get hooked onto the motor here and then run up to the switch. Now, with the switch, it doesn't make a difference which of the two sides that you connect to. there's two little tabs that stick up, and it doesn't make a difference which one of the two, or which one of the tabs the wire connects to, because the switch just allows the flow of electricity or not. The direction doesn't matter. It's if the motor is hooked up backward that it'll spin in the wrong direction. So if I put the wire through the little connector and then bend the wire upward, I can fold it over and make a connection. So this is an example of how the wires can be connected to the switch and to the motor. You can actually do this in advance before you glue it all into place. The other connector on the switch goes to the black wire on the battery clip. So let me show you a diagram in total of how it goes. You have the battery clip, which has like a big and a small thing. There's a red wire that runs from the battery clip, and that goes to, looking at the top of the little squarish motor, to this side. The shaft of the motor comes off here, and then there's a wire that you need to run down to the motor that's in the base. So you have this motor that's in the base, and it has two connectors. This side has the vent. The other side does not have a vent. So you run a wire from this side of the motor that sits on top to the side of the motor that sits in the bottom without the vent. And then the side that does have a vent, you run a wire to the switch. So here's the switch. And the switch has two little tabs on the bottom. It doesn't matter which one of the red wires is connected to the switch. And then the other side of the switch has the black wire, which runs back to the battery clip. So this is the battery clip. This is the first motor. And this is the switch. Sorry about that. That's upside down. So I'll put it this way instead. You can see here, so from the battery clip, the red wire runs to this side of the little motor with the squared off side sitting on top. The other side of the motor runs to the side of the round motor that has no vent. And then there's the side of the motor on the bottom that does have a vent that runs up to the switch. And then the other black wire from the battery clip hooks up to the switch. So long as you have it all wired up correctly, it should work just fine. Now, one important thing to make sure that you don't make a mistake on is creating a short circuit. A short circuit happens whenever you give electricity a path to flow from place to place without going through the motor itself. So these wires that I've bent up here, I want to make sure that they're in contact with the connector on the motor. But what I don't want is for the wire to touch the case of the motor itself. If wires, the metal inside the wire touches the case of the motor for both of these, it'll create a short circuit and prevent the motor from running, or it could cause the battery to overheat. So that's the wiring diagram for the Hovercraft project.